She just keeps the house. That's about all she does, really. He said it with a laugh. Not a cruel laugh, that almost would have been easier. It was the kind of laugh that comes from someone who genuinely believes what they're saying, someone who has never once considered that the sentence might be wrong. Mireille Fontaine heard it from across the room. She was holding a glass of white wine she hadn't touched yet, standing near the window of her brother-in-law's dining room in Oakville, Ontario, while 40 some guests mingled around a long table set with real linen and candles and glass votives. Her husband Callum, no, not Callum, that was in the list. Her husband Remy Beaumont was at the center of a cluster of his colleagues from the firm, expansive and warm in the way he always was when he had an audience. He had one hand on the shoulder of the man beside him, and the other wrapped around a glass of scotch, and he was explaining how the practice had grown, how the new office in Hamilton was coming along, how the past 3 years had been, honestly, remarkable. And then someone had asked, gesturing toward Mireille, "Your wife, she's not in law?" And Remy had smiled and said it. "She just keeps the house. That's about all she does, really." Mireille took a sip of her wine. It was cold and slightly too dry, and she held it in her mouth for a moment before swallowing. Across the room, Remy laughed again at something else, moved on, forgot entirely that he had said it. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was angry, though she was in a quiet, settled way that she recognized as more dangerous than the loud kind. She didn't sleep because she was thinking. She lay on her side in the dark, listening to Remy breathe beside her, and she thought about the sentence. She just keeps the house. She turned it over slowly, the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. She thought about the 3 years. She thought about the summer Remy had decided, somewhat abruptly, that he wanted to leave the large firm downtown and open his own practice. She had listened to him talk about it for 2 months before he worked up the courage. She had been the one to say, finally, then do it. She had been the one to sit with him at the kitchen table for 4 consecutive weekends, going through their finances, their savings, the mortgage, the projections. She had mapped out 18 months of runway. She had built the spreadsheets. She had made the calls to her own contacts. She had spent 12 years as a financial analyst before the twins were born. She still knew people, and she had connected Remy with 2 anchor clients who gave his new practice just enough weight to survive the first winter. She had done all of that without ever once calling it work, because she hadn't thought of it that way. She had thought of it as being married to someone and wanting them to succeed. She just keeps the house. She looked at the ceiling. Remy shifted in his sleep, pulled the duvet toward him without waking. She let him. In the morning, she made coffee. She made it the way she always did. Strong and with a small pot of steamed milk on the side, and she set it on the counter and went to sit at the kitchen table with her laptop and did not pour herself a cup. When Remy came downstairs at 7:15, he poured his coffee, looked at the table and said, "You're up early." She said. He kissed the top of her head and went to shower. She sat at the table and opened a new document and began very quietly to make a list. The first thing she did was stop answering his work emails. This requires some explanation. Remy's practice, Beaumont Legal, had grown faster than either of them had expected, which meant that the administrative side of things had grown faster too, and somewhere in the second year, somewhere between the Hamilton expansion and the summer, they hired 2 new associates. Remy had started forwarding her emails. Not formally, not as an agreed-upon arrangement, just forwarding with a short note at the top, "Can you handle this?" or thoughts, or sometimes just her name and a question mark. She had handled them. She handled scheduling conflicts and vendor negotiations, and on 3 separate occasions, the gentle but firm letters that had to go out when a client relationship had deteriorated past the point of repair. She had a gift for those. Remy always said so. "You write things in a way that doesn't make people angry," he'd told her once as a compliment, and she had taken it as one. She stopped handling them on a Tuesday morning in October. She opened his forwarded email, read it, closed it, and did not reply. She made the twins' lunches, sourdough and turkey for Odette, hummus and cucumber for Luke the way it had always been, and drove them to school and came home and did not think about email again. Remy didn't notice for 6 days. When he did notice, it was because the vendor had followed up a second time and then called the office directly, and his assistant, a young man named Sebastien, who was capable but still relatively new, hadn't known what to say. Remy mentioned it at dinner that week, slightly frazzled. "Did you see that email I sent you about the office supply contract?" "I saw it," Mireille said. "Did you get a chance to look at it?" "I haven't, no, I've been busy." He blinked. She smiled and asked Odette about her French presentation, and the conversation moved on. But she felt him glance at her twice more before dinner was over. The second thing she stopped doing was harder. Remy's practice had a small but important annual dinner in November, a client appreciation event at a restaurant in downtown Toronto. For 3 years Mireille had planned it, not because she'd been asked directly, but because the first year Remy had come to her in early October in a mild panic. "I have no idea how to organize this sort of thing. I hate these dinners. They always feel so stiff, and she had said, I'll take care of it. She had taken care of it. She knew the restaurant owner. She knew that the clients at the firm tended toward a certain demographic. Mostly small business owners in their 40s and 50s, a few younger ones, a couple of real estate developers. And she knew what they liked, which was to feel that someone had thought about them specifically. So she had done that. She had arranged the seating so that people who might do business together were near each other. She had chosen a menu that balanced dietary restrictions without drawing attention to them. She had written the brief remarks Remy delivered to open the evening, the ones that always landed well, warm without being sentimental, grateful without being performative. She did none of it this year. She did not mention to Remy that October had arrived and that the dinner would need to be organized. She did not offer and she did not remind him, and she watched him realize, sometime around the third week of October, that it had not happened yet. Have you looked into the dinner? He asked her one night, standing in the doorway of the home office where she was reading. No, she said. Did you? I thought you were going to handle that. She looked up. You didn't ask me to. He opened his mouth, closed it. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between confused and uneasy, and then he said, Right. No, of course. Sebastian can probably figure it out. Sebastian could not entirely figure it out. The dinner happened, eventually, at a restaurant that was fine but not quite right, with seating that was haphazard and remarks that Remy had clearly written himself at the last minute, earnest but slightly flat. One of the anchor clients, a woman named Dorothea, whom Mireille had known for years, texted her afterward. Different vibe this year. Everything okay? Mireille replied. Everything's fine. How was the salmon? Dorothea sent back a laughing emoji, and then, the salmon was the only good decision of the evening. It was around this time that Remy began to notice something was different. Though he couldn't have said what. He tried to put his finger on it over the course of a week. The house was clean, the twins were fine, Mireille was. She was there, fully present, making dinner and helping with homework, and laughing at the right moments. She wasn't cold. She wasn't quiet in an obviously significant way. She was just somehow slightly elsewhere in a way that was almost invisible. He asked her once carefully, Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, and she meant it in a way that made it difficult to push further. He didn't push further. The third thing, and this was the one that finally began to pull at the structural joints of things, was the network. Mireille had, over 12 years as a financial analyst and 4 more as a lawyer's wife who organized charity galas, and sat on the board of a school foundation, accumulated a certain kind of social capital. She knew people. She knew them genuinely, not the way that people sometimes know each other at events, smiling briefly and forgetting names. But actually, she remembered their children's names, remembered the conversation from 2 years ago about the restaurant they'd opened, remembered to send the article about the grant when she saw it. Remy's practice ran on referrals, and many of those referrals had come through her, in ways that were never directly attributed, because that's not how referrals work. They come through a text that says, I heard about your husband's firm, we might need someone, and then a meeting happens and the meeting goes well, and the file is opened, and by the time the file is opened the original thread back to Mireille is invisible. She stopped pulling those threads. She didn't sabotage anything. She wasn't built that way, and she knew it. But when Dorothea mentioned at lunch in November that she had a friend who was having some trouble with a business partnership dispute and was looking for a sharp lawyer, Mireille said, genuinely, That's a tricky area. You'll want someone who really specializes. Let me think about who I know. And she thought about it and mentioned 2 other names. Good names, fair names, and did not mention Remy's. She did this 3 times over the course of 4 weeks. 3 conversations where a referral would have naturally, easily, flowed toward Beaumont Legal, and instead she let it flow somewhere else. She didn't feel good about it. She didn't feel bad about it either. She felt like someone who had simply stopped doing something they had always done, without being asked, without being thanked, without being seen. She felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was being precise about where she put her energy. December came. Remy's practice had a quiet patch, not alarming but noticeable. 2 files he'd been expecting to open in November had stalled. The Hamilton office was doing fine but not growing the way he'd hoped. Sebastian had made a scheduling error that had cost them a meeting with a prospective client. One evening Remy sat at the kitchen table after the twins had gone to bed and looked at the numbers from the quarter, and he was quiet for a long time. It's slower than I expected, he said. Mireille was sitting across from him with her own tea, reading. She looked up. She said. Slower than last year? Yeah. Not dramatically. But yeah, she nodded and looked back at her book. He sat there for another moment. I don't know if I've been missing something, he said, more to himself than to her. She turned a page. Things felt easier the last couple of years, he said. I don't know if the market shifted or if he stopped. I don't know. Mireille set her book down and looked at him then, really looked at him, and she said something she had never said before. What did you think made the last couple of years easy? He looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, what do you think created the conditions for the practice to grow the way it did? The clients who came in, the events, the way things ran. What do you think was responsible for that? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, slowly, I put in a lot of work, the team's good. We've built a reputation. Yes, she said, you have. She picked up her book again. He stared at her. Something in the air had changed, though he couldn't have named what. Mireille, he said. Remy, are you trying to tell me something? She looked at him over the top of her book. Her expression was calm and utterly unreadable, and she said, I'm asking you a question. I'm curious what your answer is. He thought about it. He thought about it in a way he clearly hadn't thought about it before. She could see it happening, the visible effort of it, the slight frown. You helped, he said finally. You've always helped. With what, she said. The frown deepened. The dinner, the emails. He stopped. You know the Harrington file last spring? I think Dorothea mentioned us to them. Yes, Mireille said. Did you say something to her? I've said a lot of things to Dorothea over the years, she said, which was true and also a complete non-answer, and he knew it. He sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling and then back at her, and there was something in his face that she hadn't seen in a long time. Something careful and a little afraid. I said something at Malcolm's dinner, he said, back in September. You said a few things, she said. The thing about the house. She didn't say anything. He stopped, started again. I was showing off. I don't know what I was being. I didn't think about it. I know, she said. That's the part I keep coming back to. It was the quietest version of a reckoning she had ever seen someone have. There was no scene. There were no raised voices. There was Remy at the kitchen table in December with a glass of water he'd forgotten to drink, and Mireille across from him, and the specific kind of silence that happens when two people have been married for 11 years, and one of them has finally decided to say the thing they have been not saying. How long? He asked. How long what? How long have you been doing all of this? The things I apparently don't, the things I didn't. 12 years, she said. The financial analysis work, the network, the planning. That's been there since before we got married, Remy. I just applied it differently when your practice started. Why didn't you tell me? She looked at him steadily. I told you things. You didn't ask about them. That's not. He stopped. Okay, that's fair. I wasn't hiding anything, she said. I was doing what I do. I've always done it. The problem is that you decided at some point that what I do doesn't count as doing anything. He looked like he'd been handed something heavy. I sat with it. The thing at the dinner, he said finally. That wasn't how I actually see you. Then why did you say it? He was quiet for a long time. Because I forgot, he said. Not that I don't value you. I do. I think I do. I thought I did. But I forgot what it was I was valuing. I stopped seeing it. It was, she thought, the most honest thing he'd said in a long time, maybe in years. She didn't reward it immediately. He hadn't earned that yet. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, she said. I know, and I'm not going to keep doing things that aren't visible and aren't acknowledged and aren't considered work just because we've both gotten comfortable with that arrangement. I know, he said again quietly. Do you? He looked at her. What do you need? She had thought about that question. She had thought about it in October and November and the early weeks of December, lying awake in the dark, turning it over. She knew what she didn't want, which was an apology that resolved itself into forgetting. She knew what she did want, which was something more durable than a promise. I need you to actually know what I do, she said, not in a general way, specifically. I want you to know what it is in the same way I know what you do. He nodded slowly. And I want to be compensated for it, she said. He blinked. You want? I've been doing financial consulting level work for your practice for 3 years, she said. Informally, without a title, without pay, without acknowledgement. I want to formalize it. If you want me to keep doing it, I want a role, a real one. He was quiet for a long moment. You want to be part of the practice. I want to be recognized as part of the practice that I already am, she said. There's a difference. She told her sister about it the following week. They were having lunch at a cafe on Lakeshore in Burlington, and her sister, Veronique, who was nothing if not direct, put down her fork partway through Mireille's account and said, You should have burned the whole thing down. I know, Mireille said. But I didn't want to. Why not? Mireille thought about it. Because I love him, she said. I'm not interested in burning down the life we built because he stopped seeing me. I'm interested in making sure it doesn't happen again. Veronique looked at her for a moment. You've already drawn up the arrangement, haven't you? In draft, of course you have. She shook her head, but she was smiling. What did he say when you showed him? I haven't shown him yet. I'm having a lawyer look at it first. You're having a lawyer? He is a lawyer, Mireille. He's my husband. That's different. Veronique reached across the table and refilled her water glass and said, You know what I love about you? You are the most terrifyingly calm person I have ever met. Mireille smiled. I had a good teacher. Who? Every woman who ever had to figure out how to get credit for what she built, she said, and decided to do it quietly. The arrangement was formalized in January. It wasn't a dramatic document. It was 2 pages, drafted with the help of a lawyer friend of hers in Mississauga, outlining a consulting role for Mireille within Beaumont Legal, with defined responsibilities, defined compensation, and quarterly reviews. It was, if you read it without context, a perfectly ordinary professional agreement. Remy read it in his office on a Thursday afternoon. He called her when he was done. "This is very thorough," he said. "Yes," she said. "The billing structure for the network development work is fair," she said. "I had it benchmarked." There was a pause on the line. "Of course you did," he said, and she could hear in his voice something she hadn't heard in a long time. Not admiration exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. The specific sound of someone seeing something clearly for the first time. "I'll sign it," he said. "Good," she said. There was a silence, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that exists between 2 people who have said something difficult and real, and are still standing on the same side of it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Did you the Harrington file? The Okonkwo referral, the dinner with the Hamilton developers last spring? Were those?" "Yes," she said. He let out a breath. "Right," a pause. "And the November dinner this year? The one that felt off?" Sebastian tried his best. Another pause. "I didn't give him the tools you would have given him." "No," she agreed. "You didn't, Mireille," he said. "Remy, I'm sorry, I know that doesn't. I know it's not enough on its own. But I want to say it anyway. I'm sorry for the dinner in September. I'm sorry for how long it probably should have been said before that." She sat with it for a moment. She didn't dismiss it. She didn't accept it as resolution. She just let it be what it was, honest, late, and the beginning of something rather than the end. "Thank you," she said. The first client meeting where Mireille sat at the table as a named partner. Not Remy's wife, not someone who happened to be there, but Fontaine, consulting director, Beaumont Legal, was in February. A family business succession dispute. The kind of case that required not just legal clarity, but a careful management of relationships that had become complicated over years of money and memory. Remy had asked her to take the lead on the initial assessment. She walked into that meeting and she introduced herself, and she did what she had always done, which was to understand people quickly and build a framework around what they needed. And she did it, without hiding it. Without folding it back into the background. Without making it invisible. Afterward, the clients, 2 brothers in their 50s, serious men who had been defensive and cagey at the start, shook her hand and said they looked forward to working with her. The older one said, "You explain things in a way that doesn't make people feel stupid." "Thank you," she said. She meant it. In the car on the way home, Remy said, "That was something." "Yes," she said. "You've always been able to do that," he said. I didn't always know I was watching it." She looked out the window at the gray February sky, the bare trees along the highway, the long flat stretch of the lake in the distance. "Well," she said, "now you know." He reached over and put his hand briefly over hers, and she let him, and they drove the rest of the way home in the particular quiet of 2 people who are still learning, again, how to see each other. The twins were already home when they arrived. Luke had made an attempt at pasta that had mostly succeeded. Odette had set the table without being asked. Remy looked at the kitchen, at his children, at the table, at Mireille coming in from the cold and pulling off her coat. And he said nothing, but he looked at it the way you look at something you almost lost track of. She hung her coat and went to taste Luke's pasta and tell him it was good, and it was mostly, and she thought, this is what it is to be seen. It's not a single moment, it's a practice, it's the same daily decision, made over and over, to look clearly at what's actually in front of you. She thought about the woman at the Oakville dinner in September, who had stood at the window holding a glass of white wine she hadn't touched yet. Hearing her husband explain her to strangers in a single careless sentence, she thought. That woman knew something was wrong. She was right to trust that, and she had. And here she was.